You drive up here acting important like nobody can question you?
You are making a very serious mistake.
Those IDs are fake, ma'am, and you better stop lying to me.
Officer, please lower your voice. You're scaring my children.
Vanessa Carter was 39 years old and raising 2 children alone after losing her husband 3 years earlier. Most people looking at her that night would only see a tired mother behind the wheel of a black SUV. They would never guess she was one of the top federal attorneys working for the Department of Justice. Inside Washington, her name carried quiet respect. She had helped take down major trafficking groups across several states, and now she was connected to a sealed investigation so dangerous that only a few people in the government even knew the full details. It was late evening at the U.S. Mexico border crossing. Long lines of vehicles stretched across the checkpoint while bright floodlights covered the area in white light. Families waited inside hot cars. Armed agents walked between lanes with flashlights and radios. Cameras watched every angle of the crossing, recording every stop and every search. Vanessa had been driving for hours. Her son was asleep against the window while her daughter held a half-eaten bag of chips in her lap. Both children were tired, hungry, and confused by the delay. Vanessa herself looked exhausted. Her eyes were heavy, and grief still lived quietly behind them. Even after years, losing her husband had changed everything about her life. Still, she stayed calm and polite. She answered questions clearly and kept her hands visible on the steering wheel. All she wanted was to cross the checkpoint peacefully and get her children home safely. Senior Border Patrol Officer Daniel Mercer noticed her immediately. Mercer had worked the border for 17 years and had built a reputation for aggressive stops. Complaints against him had disappeared inside the system for years. He believed fear gave officers control, and he often targeted minorities and women traveling alone. The moment Mercer saw a black woman driving an expensive SUV with government tags and sealed legal folders on the passenger seat, his mind was already made up. He decided she did not belong there. Without hesitation, he waved her vehicle into secondary inspection. Vanessa slowly rolled down her window as Officer Mercer walked toward the SUV. His flashlight moved across her face, then toward the back seat where her children sat quietly. The little girl held a blanket against her chest while her younger brother rubbed his tired eyes. Mercer stopped beside the driver's door and rested one hand on the roof of the vehicle. "License, registration, and whatever federal papers you think make this look official," he said sharply. Vanessa kept both hands on the steering wheel. "Of course, officer," she replied calmly. She reached carefully into her bag and handed him her driver's license, Department of Justice identification card, and travel authorization papers. Mercer looked over the documents slowly. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw the gold federal seal on the DOJ card. He let out a small laugh under his breath. "A federal attorney," he said. "You expect me to believe that?" Vanessa stayed calm. "Yes, sir. I work for the Department of Justice." Mercer looked back at the children. "And you're crossing the border alone with 2 kids in the middle of the night?" He shook his head. "Something about this story doesn't sound right." Her daughter shifted nervously in the back seat. "Mom," she whispered softly. "It's okay, baby," Vanessa answered gently. "Everything's okay." Mercer held up the ID card again. "You know how many fake badges we see out here?" he asked loudly. "People print these things online every day." "They're real credentials," Vanessa replied. "You can verify them through the DOJ contact listed on the authorization form." But Mercer was no longer listening. His voice had grown louder now, enough for nearby agents and travelers to hear. 2 officers standing near the inspection lane turned to watch. A family in the next vehicle rolled down their window slightly. "You think driving an expensive SUV and flashing a government card means nobody can question you?" Mercer asked. That trick may work somewhere else, but not here. Vanessa took a slow breath. Officer, I've cooperated with every request. My children are tired, and we've been traveling all day. If there's a problem, I would respectfully like to speak with your supervisor. The moment she said the word supervisor, Mercer's expression changed completely. His jaw tightened, and the mocking smile disappeared from his face. You don't get to demand anything out here, he snapped. Vanessa remained calm. I'm not demanding anything, sir. I'm simply asking for another officer to review my documents. Mercer suddenly tossed the papers back through the window onto her lap. Her son jumped at the sound. Several nearby agents were openly watching now, though none stepped closer. Mercer pointed toward the inspection area beside the checkpoint. Everybody out of the vehicle, he ordered coldly. Now. Mercer pulled open the back of the SUV before Vanessa could say another word. The cold evening air rushed inside as he grabbed the first suitcase he saw. He dropped it hard onto the pavement and unzipped it halfway. Clothes spilled across the ground beside the inspection lane. Travelers in nearby cars started slowing down to watch. Red and blue checkpoint lights flashed across the wet pavement while armed agents walked between vehicles. Please stop frightening my children, Vanessa said softly. Mercer ignored her. He grabbed another bag, this one covered in small cartoon stickers. He dumped crayons, books, and children's clothes onto the ground without care. Vanessa's younger son began crying harder from the back seat. His small hands shook as he held onto his sister's arm. The older child looked out the window with wide eyes, trying not to cry herself. You should have thought about that before bringing fake federal papers through my checkpoint, Mercer said loudly. They are real credentials, Vanessa replied calmly. Please stop frightening my children. Mercer slammed the trunk shut and walked back toward her. His boots scraped hard against the pavement. Several travelers nearby now had phones raised in the air. Some whispered to each other while recording. A woman standing beside a white pickup truck shook her head quietly as she watched the scene unfold. Officer Luis Ortega, Mercer's younger partner, shifted uncomfortably beside the SUV. He glanced toward the crying children and then toward the growing crowd. Maybe we should wait for a supervisor, Ortega said carefully. Mercer turned sharply toward him. I know exactly what I'm doing. Vanessa stayed calm even as her children cried behind her. Sir, I have fully cooperated with you. Please stop frightening my children. Mercer gave a cold smile. You keep saying that like it changes something. He stepped back to the SUV and reached deeper inside. His eyes landed on a dark leather folder resting beneath a blanket on the seat. A gold federal seal was stamped across the front. Mercer grabbed it immediately. Vanessa's face changed for the first time. Officer, do not open that, she said firmly. Those are sealed federal case files. Mercer laughed under his breath. Sure they are. He flipped the folder open while several nearby agents looked over. Thick legal documents filled the inside pocket, each stamped with federal markings and red warning labels. Mercer pulled one file out roughly. Sir, you are not authorized to read that, Vanessa said. Mercer ignored her. He tore the edge of the sealed file partly open with his thumb. The moment the seal ripped, Officer Ortega's face went pale. Vanessa stepped forward quickly the moment the seal tore open. Fear flashed across her face as Mercer held the damaged file in his hands under the bright checkpoint lights. Several pages slipped partly out of the folder, showing federal markings and names covered by black security bars. Officer, stop right now, Vanessa said firmly. Those files are federally protected. Mercer looked at her with cold eyes. Now you want to panic. You do not have clearance for those documents, she said. Please hand them back. Vanessa reached carefully toward the folder, but Mercer suddenly grabbed her hard by the arm. The force spun her sideways against the SUV. Her shoulder hit the metal door with a loud bang that echoed through the checkpoint. The children screamed instantly. "Mom!" Mercer shoved her harder against the vehicle while still holding the torn file. Travelers nearby gasped as phones lifted higher into the air. More people started recording from different lines across the checkpoint. Flashing lights reflected off the SUV windows while agents turned to watch the growing scene. "I am not resisting," Vanessa said clearly, her cheek pressed against the cold vehicle door. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Mercer barked. "You are on camera," Vanessa said calmly through heavy breathing. "Those files are federally protected." Mercer tightened his grip on her wrist. "You want to obstruct a federal inspection? I can arrest you for that." Officer Ortega looked deeply uncomfortable now. He glanced toward the crowd and then at the crying children inside the SUV. "Mercer, maybe slow down," Ortega said quietly. "Everybody's recording." Mercer ignored him completely. Vanessa's younger son pushed against the backseat window with tears running down his face. "That's my mom. Stop hurting her." His sister grabbed him tightly while crying beside him. The sound of the children crying spread across the inspection lanes, making even more people stop and stare. A man near the front of the line lowered his phone and muttered, "This is getting out of control." Vanessa stayed still against the SUV. "I am cooperating," she said. "Please do not scare my children anymore." Mercer leaned closer to her ear. "You should have thought about that before trying to fool federal officers." Vanessa slowly turned her head enough to look at him. Despite the fear in her eyes, her voice stayed calm. "You have no idea what you are doing." Before Mercer could answer, headlights suddenly swept across the checkpoint entrance. A large black SUV with dark federal plates pulled into the inspection area fast enough to make nearby agents step aside. The vehicle stopped sharply only a few feet from Mercer and Vanessa. The doors of the black SUV opened almost instantly. Two federal agents stepped out wearing dark jackets with gold badges hanging from their belts. Their faces were serious as they moved quickly toward the inspection lane. One of them, a tall older man with gray hair, stopped the moment he saw Vanessa pressed against the SUV. "Ms. Carter," he said sharply. Vanessa looked toward him, still pinned against the vehicle. "Agent Ross." The agent's expression changed immediately. He walked faster toward Mercer while the second agent moved directly to the crying children inside the SUV. "Step away from her right now," Ross ordered. Mercer slowly loosened his grip and took a step back. For the first time that night, his confidence seemed to crack. He looked between the agents and Vanessa as if trying to understand what was happening. At that moment, Border Patrol Supervisor Elena Ruiz hurried into the checkpoint lane after hearing radio calls from nearby agents. She looked confused by the crowd, the raised phones, and the federal SUV parked beside the inspection area. "What is going on here?" Ruiz asked. Agent Ross ignored the question at first. His eyes locked on Mercer's badge. He read the name aloud slowly. Senior Border Patrol Officer Daniel Mercer. Mercer swallowed hard. Ross looked down at the torn federal file still sitting on the hood of the SUV. Several marked pages were partly exposed to the crowd and cameras around them. "You opened sealed Department of Justice case files?" Ross asked coldly. Mercer tried to steady his voice. She was acting suspicious. "I believe the credentials were fake." Ross stared at him in silence for a moment. "Do you even know who she is?" Mercer looked toward Vanessa again. The calm woman he had mocked and shoved only minutes earlier now stood quietly beside two federal agents while travelers recorded every second. Supervisor Ruiz stepped closer, clearly nervous now. "Agent, maybe we can settle this calmly." Ross finally turned toward her. "This woman is Senior Federal Attorney Vanessa Carter. She is attached to a sealed investigation involving cartel money, border corruption, and federal trafficking cases connected to active border operations." Ruiz's face lost color instantly. The second agent carefully picked up the damaged file and checked the torn seal. Washington has been monitoring movement tied to this case for weeks, he said. Every transfer point. Every stop. Every contact. The crowd around the checkpoint grew quieter as the weight of the words settled over the area. Mercer looked stunned. I didn't know. No, Ross replied sharply. You didn't bother to know. Vanessa gently pulled her frightened children close while the agent stood beside her. Her shoulder still hurt from being shoved against the SUV, but she remained calm. Agent Ross stepped closer to Mercer, his voice low enough to cut through the silence around them. Do you realize you just interfered with an active federal operation? Within an hour, the checkpoint conference room was filled with federal agents, supervisors, and investigators from Homeland Security. Mercer's bodycam footage was already playing on a large screen. The room stayed silent as the video showed him slamming his hand against Vanessa's window while her children cried in the back seat. Every word sounded worse the second time. You people always flash government IDs when you get caught. The sentence echoed through the room while several investigators took notes. The footage clearly showed Vanessa calmly handing over valid Department of Justice credentials. It also showed Mercer ignoring them almost immediately. Supervisor Ruiz stood near the back wall with crossed arms and a worried face. Each minute of footage made the situation look worse. The camera captured the moment Mercer called the documents fake. It showed Vanessa asking politely for a supervisor. It showed him dumping the children's bags onto the pavement while people gathered around recording. Then came the part nobody in the room could ignore. The federal seal was fully visible on camera before Mercer tore the file open. One Homeland Security investigator paused the video and zoomed in on the screen. The warning labels and DOJ markings could be seen clearly even through the shaky bodycam footage. He had visual confirmation right there, the investigator said quietly. The second video came from a traveler standing only a few feet away. That footage had already spread across social media before midnight. Millions of people were watching clips of Vanessa pressed against the SUV while her children screamed in fear. News stations replayed Mercer's words again and again. That's my mom. Stop hurting her. The child's voice became the most shared part of the video online. Reporters began contacting Border Patrol headquarters before sunrise. By morning, national news channels were discussing the checkpoint incident live on television. Inside the conference room, another investigator opened a file filled with older complaints connected to Mercer. Several reports described aggressive stops, racial targeting, and threats against women traveling alone. Some complaints were years old. Supervisor Ruiz looked stunned as the investigator placed printed emails on the table. One message from a senior supervisor read, Mercer creates problems, but his arrest numbers are strong. Leave it alone. Another warned that Mercer's behavior could eventually lead to federal trouble. The room became tense. By noon, both the Department of Justice and Homeland Security officially opened investigations into the checkpoint incident and Border Patrol leadership connected to Mercer. Mercer sat alone in another office down the hall, staring at the floor while agents moved in and out of the building around him. The confidence he carried earlier that night was completely gone now. Two federal investigators entered the room without speaking much. One held out a hand. Officer Mercer, he said calmly, we are taking your body cam and duty phone as evidence. The second investigator placed an evidence bag on the table between them. The checkpoint incident spread across the country faster than Border Patrol leaders could control it. By the next evening, old complaints against Officer Daniel Mercer were appearing all over the news. Reporters found records going back more than 10 years. Many of the complaints came from women, black travelers, and Latino families who said Mercer stopped them without reason and treated them like criminals. One woman named Teresa Alvarez spoke during a television interview outside her home in Arizona. She said Mercer once forced her elderly father out of a vehicle during a border stop while her young daughter cried in the back seat. He kept saying we looked suspicious, she said. We were only coming home from a funeral. Another man described Mercer searching his truck for almost 2 hours while insulting his wife's accent. A college student said Mercer threatened to cancel her visa after she asked for a supervisor. Every story sounded painfully similar. Soon, former Border Patrol agents also started speaking publicly. Some described a toxic culture inside the checkpoint where complaints were ignored if officers produced high arrest numbers. A retired agent named Marcus Reed shocked viewers during one interview. People warned supervisors about Mercer for years, he said. But leadership protected officers who made big seizures or arrests. Nobody wanted bad headlines. Then leaked emails began appearing online. One message from a supervisor called Mercer aggressive but effective. Another warned that his behavior toward women and minority travelers could become a legal disaster one day. Instead of discipline, supervisors buried the complaints quietly inside internal files. News stations across the country began using the same phrase. A pattern of unchecked misconduct. The videos from the checkpoint played non-stop on television and social media. Again and again, viewers watched Vanessa Carter pushed against the SUV while her children screamed in fear. The sound of her young son crying became one of the most shared clips online. That's my mom. Stop hurting her. The public anger grew larger every day. Even Mercer's fellow officers began pulling away from him. Some refused interviews completely. Others quietly told investigators they had seen Mercer escalate traffic stops many times before. Officer Ortega finally gave a formal statement describing how uncomfortable he became during Vanessa's stop. By the end of the week, protesters gathered outside Border Patrol headquarters carrying signs and enlarged screenshots from the videos. Some demanded Mercer be fired immediately. Others demanded federal charges against supervisors who ignored earlier warnings. Inside the building, leadership held emergency meetings while cameras waited outside the entrance. Late that afternoon, Border Patrol released a short public statement. Officer Daniel Mercer had officially been placed on unpaid suspension pending federal investigation. The next morning, Officer Daniel Mercer arrived at the border station through a side entrance. Reporters were already waiting outside the front gate. Cameras followed every vehicle entering the parking lot. His name was across every news station in the country. The videos from the checkpoint had spread everywhere overnight. Millions of people had watched Vanessa Carter pressed against her SUV while her children cried in fear. Millions had heard Mercer shout at her while ignoring her federal identification. The sound of the little boy screaming, "That's my mom," played again and again on television and online. Mercer was taken into a private office on the second floor. Two internal affairs investigators waited inside with a supervisor from Homeland Security. Nobody smiled when he entered. Nobody shook his hand. One investigator placed a form on the desk and told him to remove his badge, firearm, radio, and access card immediately. Mercer stared at them for several seconds before slowly unclipping the badge from his uniform. The room stayed silent as he placed his weapon on the table beside it. For the first time in 17 years, he walked out of that office without authority. Outside the building, protesters gathered near the entrance holding signs demanding justice. Some signs showed screenshots from the Bodycam footage. Others showed Vanessa standing beside her children at the checkpoint. News reporters spoke live from the sidewalk while legal experts discussed possible criminal charges. Several attorneys explained that Mercer could face federal civil rights violations, unlawful detention charges, and obstruction charges connected to the sealed federal investigation. Former federal prosecutors warned that interfering with protected government material could carry serious prison time if prosecutors proved intent. Inside Washington, pressure continued growing. Members of Congress publicly demanded answers from Border Patrol leadership. One senator called the footage a complete abuse of power against a grieving mother and federal officer. Another demanded hearings into misconduct at southern border checkpoints. Lawsuits were already being prepared by civil rights groups. Vanessa's legal team also confirmed they were reviewing possible action against the department and individual supervisors who ignored years of complaints about Mercer's behavior. At the checkpoint itself, investigators expanded their work quickly. Internal Affairs began reviewing years of bodycam footage and disciplinary files connected to Mercer and several supervisors above him. Leaked emails showed repeated warnings from agents who complained about aggressive stops involving women and minority travelers. Some officers who once supported Mercer now refused to speak publicly about him at all. Others quietly told investigators they feared this situation had been coming for years. Mercer watched the coverage alone from his home that night, waiting for calls that never came. 3 weeks later, federal prosecutors officially announced the first court date during a packed press conference in Washington. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions outside the courthouse steps. Across the country, people continued debating the case online and on television. And for Daniel Mercer, the moment that started with one traffic lane at a crowded checkpoint was now leading toward a federal courtroom with the entire nation watching. 3 days after the court date was announced, Vanessa Carter finally returned home with her children. The long drive back felt quiet after weeks of noise, cameras, and reporters following every part of their lives. Her son fell asleep in the back seat before they even reached the city limits. Her daughter sat beside him holding a small stuffed rabbit against her chest. Vanessa kept both hands on the steering wheel as rain moved softly across the windshield. For the first time in days, there were no flashing lights behind her and no officers shouting at her through a window. When they reached home, the children walked slowly inside while Vanessa carried their bags through the front door. The house still felt empty without her husband. His picture remained on the shelf near the hallway, smiling beside the family from happier days. Vanessa stopped for a moment and looked at it quietly before helping the children get ready for bed. The television in the living room was still showing news coverage from the checkpoint. Another reporter was talking about the federal investigation and the growing pressure on Border Patrol leadership. Later that night, Vanessa sat beside her daughter on the edge of the bed while the little girl held onto her blanket tightly. Her daughter looked up at her with tired eyes and asked softly, "Are bad police going to jail now?" Vanessa did not answer right away. She looked down at her hands for a long moment before speaking. "Justice takes time," she said quietly. "Sometimes longer than it should. But the truth matters. And people saw the truth." Her daughter nodded slowly and rested her head against Vanessa's shoulder. Across the country, the debate continued growing louder. News stations replayed the checkpoint footage every night. Lawyers, former agents, and civil rights leaders argued about abuse of power and racial profiling at border crossings. Protesters gathered outside federal buildings demanding change. Supporters of Vanessa praised her calmness during the stop and the way she protected her children under pressure. More travelers continued sharing stories about similar treatment at checkpoints across the country. The investigation had become bigger than one officer and one traffic lane. Federal investigators continued collecting evidence while lawyers prepared for court. Inside government offices, officials reviewed bodycam footage frame by frame. Reporters kept uncovering more details about the sealed cartel investigation tied to Vanessa's work. And somewhere far from the cameras, Vanessa focused on helping her children feel safe again after the terrifying night that changed all their lives. The footage kept spreading. The country kept watching. And for the officers caught on camera that night, the story was only beginning. If this story moved you, wait until you see what happened in the next case. The next bodycam footage shocked even federal investigators. Watch the story on the right.